Michael's going to tell me the name of the columnist that we found. What was his name? That did the Tribune article. It wasn't Kroll.
Rick Hogan.
Rick Hogan. If you've ever, he's actually on the radio. If you can pick up 50,000 watt WGN, he's on Sunday mornings, I think, or no, he's at night now. Sunday evenings. He's from a journalist family, so people that are into Rick Hogan tune into his show. It's really good. And he did a column. He discovered that Michael was into originally baseball cards. He discovered, like many of us, this special treasure trove in his grandfather's attic of old cards, and he'll make the rest of my story make sense. And from there it grew into what he's about today, where he can evaluate your special collections, not just of cards, but of other things, baseball and sport-wise. And he's actually done assessments for a number of Major League ball players. And I discovered he was actually on the morning news program on WGN. Was it Wednesday or Thursday of this week? They brought him in to talk with him. So I'm hoping, pray God, this is, and I apologize to all the people that have done conferences, that this, and Michael and I already had this conversation, this is not another guy bringing up his book and reading it to us. So with no further ado, I bring you with Michael Osacky.
All right, thanks everybody for having me, for coming in today. Special thanks to Gary and Ellie for calling me about 8 or 9 months ago or so and booking this engagement on this evening, April 16th. So I do have about a 45-minute or so presentation up here, and then afterwards, some of you had questions for me. A couple of people also brought in some items. I'm happy to take a look. I'll probably set up a table up here after my presentation. Feel free to come up to me. I'll stay for as long as I need to, and I am yours for the evening, okay? So let's get started. So as I was thinking about this program and what I was going to talk about today, you know, this hobby that I'm in, this industry, is much more encompassing than just cards. It's about memorabilia, autographs. Why is authentication so important? We'll talk about that. I do have an agenda for today, which you see behind me here. Before I get started, there's an empty table up here. If you can't see, or if there's a big glare, or if you can't hear me, either move to the front or shout something and I'll try to be louder, okay? So the first things first is we'll talk a little bit about myself and kind of who I am and what I do. And then additionally we'll talk about some of the very, very old cards, 19th century cards, 20th century cards. What were some of those issues? Why are some of those so important? We'll talk about those. Additionally, as we kind of move on to the early 1900s, there's Goudy, there's Topps. Most of us recall going to the 5 and dime store in the 50s and 60s, and inside each pack of cards would be a stick of bubble gum. We'll talk about that, where that got started. And then, as I just mentioned, memorabilia, autographs, authentication. Extremely important, hot talking point right now. We'll go through that kind of towards the end. A couple of years ago, February of 2014, spring training, the Huffington Post called me and they said, Michael, do us a favor, write an article how people at home can self-appraise what they have. And we'll talk about that at the end. And then also we'll open it up for questions, okay? Oh, lastly, on most of the slides here today, I do have a picture. It could be an autograph, it could be a baseball card, it could be a program, it could be anything. These are items that I have at home in my personal collection in Chicago. I actually grew up about 15 minutes away from here in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Okay? So, how did I get started? Where's my book? How did I get started? No, I won't bore you with that. Back in 1997, my grandfather, for my birthday, brought me a shoebox full of very old baseball cards for my birthday. And up until that point, I was jumping on my bicycle and going to the local pharmacy or grocery store and buying all the new stuff, all the new basketball cards, all the new baseball cards. But really, it was eye-opening when I opened up that shoebox. The cards inside were really old. Cards from the 50s and cards from the 60s. Cards I'd never seen before. And it got me on the hunt of trying to do two things. Firstly, I tried to find more of them because they were just so amazing. I'd never seen them before. Secondarily, I started educating myself about the history associated with all these ball players. And that's kind of how it got started, almost 20 years ago. My expertise, and I'm a certified appraiser, as you see on this plaque up here, is 1870 to 1970, across all sports. It could be cards, memorabilia, autographs, you name it. And the reason why I stop at 1970 is because, generally speaking, stuff from the 80s and 90s, of course we're talking about 1980s and 1990s, I know in this room I got to specify here, but those things don't have a lot of value. They're so mass-produced, they're not that old, and when we think about supply and demand, there isn't a lot of demand out there for items like that. One of the great things that I'm privileged to do is interview some of the great Hall of Fame athletes. So Ernie Banks, who passed away last year, Whitey Ford, Bob Feller. Bob Feller actually gave me his last public interview here in Chicago before he passed away in December 2010. That interview was published in his hometown of Van Meter, Iowa, a couple days after his passing. So I write for Huffington Post, I write for Parade Magazine, I contribute to New York Times, American Legion Magazine, Kiplinger's. Last week, as Gary was saying, I was on WGN TV plugging this appearance here. So hopefully you guys got some clicks on your website and some more eyeballs as well off of that. So 19th century cards. Who knows what the purpose was of 19th century cards? Any thoughts?
Sell cigarettes.
Advertising, yes, exactly. So on most of the front and or the backs of the cards, there will be some sort of stamping or advertising associated with each particular brand. In 1868, one of the very first baseball card issues ever produced, the Peck and Snyder set, which is a very collectible set today, came out. And I mention that because a couple years ago in Fresno, California, a woman was going through her attic and found an 1868 Peck and Snyder baseball card. And she had been selling on eBay for many, many, many years. She was the picker. And she put the card up on eBay, and instantaneously she was inundated with requests. Please ship it to me overnight. I'll buy it from you for $10. I need this card for my set, all this good stuff. And she was pretty smart. She talked to her husband and said, hey, honey, what's going on? For some reason, everybody's interested in just one particular card. And so she removed the card from eBay, did some research on it. A couple weeks after that, she appeared on the Jay Leno show, talked about it, and talked about why this was such a rare card. A month after her appearance on the Jay Leno Tonight Show, that card sold for over $70,000, something she thought was only worth about $10. So it just goes to show you that there is still stuff out there buried in farms and barns and attics and garages. I talk to people all the time on a daily basis. There are some interesting things still yet to be found and discovered. This football card I have on the right here is an 1895 Mayo Cut Plug card. What's interesting about this set is this only features Ivy Leaguers. So men from Brown and Princeton and Yale and Harvard. There's 48 cards in this set. And you can find these cards in two different poses, so to speak. The first is their street clothes, and the second is their football uniform, as you see up on here in this picture of Jensen Beard in 1895. Now, about 6 or 7 months ago, I was doing a presentation, similar to this. There were about 100 people in the room, and afterwards a woman came up to me and she said, Michael, great job. I learned a ton. This was really, really, really informative. But why don't you ever mention anything about females in baseball? And it got me on the hunt, not necessarily on the hunt of doing research, but thinking of brainstorming, and she really did have a valid point. Because in the late 1800s, there was a big interest in females in baseball. The interest was they wanted to find a male suitor. They wanted to find a husband. And they said to themselves, you know what? We can throw a baseball. We can hit a baseball. Let's start playing with the men and see if we can partner up and have a family. And that got started in 1883. The Young Ladies Baseball Club was formed. Now, the Young Ladies Baseball Club didn't have great success. It quickly changed and morphed in the mid-1890s to the Bloomer Girls that lasted until about 1934. And what's really interesting and unique about the Bloomer Girls is that each team had to have at least 3 men on the team. In fact, some of the great Hall of Famers, such as Rogers Hornsby, got his start playing with the females in the early 1900s. So let's talk about some values here. This picture I have on the bottom left-hand corner, this is when I was in southeastern Wisconsin last year, and the newspaper took a picture. This gentleman, Ron, after my presentation, he brought up a huge duffel bag of team signed baseballs from Racine Bells, Kenosha Comets. And I asked him where he found them, and he said, Michael, I did not find them, I did not buy them. I worked at the stadium. I did the lights, I did the scoreboards, I cleaned the bathrooms. I had intimate access to all of these teams and the players, so I was able to get these team-signed baseballs. But what happened was, when I started to look inside that bag and assess the value, I couldn't read anything. And I asked him what happened. And he said, Michael, these baseballs were stored in my basement, and the basement flooded, and so everything was essentially ruined. And so he didn't really have great value because everything was, damaged. You couldn't read anything really on the ball. But he did have some great memories and stories that he shared. We probably talked for about 45 minutes after my presentation. Really great guy, some great, great stories. From 1909 to 1911, the American Tobacco Company started to manufacture baseball cards. And they did that for 3 consecutive years. This is a huge, huge set. There's 524 cards, and here we are today, over 100 years later. This set is widely collected. One of the reasons, and there's many reasons, is the colors, the purple and the red and the green and the yellow. They are very, very, very striking. Additionally, you find these cards in multiple different poses. You see guys wearing their street clothes or baseball uniform, wearing a black hat or wearing a white hat, standing or squatting. The list goes on and on and on. There are a ton of variations associated with this set. This was the first set right here in 1909 to include minor leaguers. Up until this point, minor leaguers were never ever included in any baseball card set. Generally speaking, these minor leaguers hail from the southern and southeastern part of the country. So Tupelo, Mississippi, Atlanta, Georgia, Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Who knows what the most valuable baseball card is?
Honest Wagner.
Honest Wagner, exactly. Very good. Yeah, that card every year or so you'll see on CNN, or you'll read about it in the Wall Street Journal. There's maybe only about 50 or 60 known to date. But what I think is interesting about this card, and being that I'm speaking here in Chicago, is a couple years ago, and I should say, that card ranges in value. It ranges anywhere from, on the low end, meaning it's been outside for the last 40, 50 years in the rain and the snow. It's been run over by a semi-truck. That card will sell for $150,000. Upwards to $2.7, $2.8 million for just one baseball card. Now, that card that did sell for $2.8 million a few years ago, the buyer was the owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks, Ken Kendrick. Now, what Ken Kendrick did not know when he purchased that card is that several decades ago, that card had been trimmed. And we'll go into detail later about why people trim cards, but essentially, the value in cards is about condition and the corners. How sharp are the corners? Well, this Honus Wagner card was a little bit oversized. Don't forget, 100 years ago, there was really no quality control coming off the printing press. It's not like it is today. So it was a little bit oversized, and so a gentleman, actually here in Chicago, trimmed that card. And that gentleman that actually did trim that card, he was engaged in some other scandalous, bad activities. A couple months ago in Chicago, was sentenced to jail. he's spending 22 months in jail for trimming that card and doing some other bad things. So just like in your line of work, there could be some bad actors. In my line of work, the same thing exists as well. In the spring of 2012, in a small, swampy town in northwestern Ohio, a gentleman went up into his attic, and the house had been passed down from generation to generation. There was this huge, great big dollhouse up there. But what happened was, when he moved the dollhouse, underneath were about 700 tobacco cards from 100 years ago. And that find is really eye-opening for two reasons. One, it's not that often you find 700 tobacco cards all in one fell swoop. It just doesn't happen. But what was even more striking is that each card was essentially in mint condition, pristine condition. I think what happened was the gentleman that bought them 100 years ago at the 5 and dime went home, put them up in the attic, and essentially forgot about them for 100 years. Now, this gentleman has a very, very large family. Putting kids through college, as you know, is not cheap. Last time I checked, he sold 550 of the 700 cards for $3.5 million. When all is said and done, this is over a $5 million collection. Quite astonishing. So being born and raised here in Chicago, Cracker Jack actually launched in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair. And when it was launched, there was a huge PR and marketing blitz associated with the Cracker Jack brand. However, sales had started to plateau and actually dip around 1910, and the executive management of the team was trying to figure out how to jumpstart sales again. So what they did was they started to manufacture and insert little trinkets into each box of Cracker Jacks. And that started in 1910. In 1914, that changed a little bit. They started manufacturing baseball cards, and they inserted that into each package of Cracker Jack, but they only did it for 2 years, 1914 and 1915. We'll talk about some of the differences between those 2 years on the next slide, but one thing I want to touch base on here, spring training 2004, Hal Steinbrenner, the son of the late George Steinbrenner, had a press conference and said, "At Yankee Stadium, we will no longer be selling Cracker Jacks. We will substitute a competitor called Crunch and Munch." Well, once the Yankee fandom heard about that, they threatened to boycott the entire season. They could not believe that when they went to the Bronx for the games, that they could not buy their Cracker Jacks. So these fans wrote into all the papers, they wrote nasty letters, they called their TV stations, they called their radio station, they were extremely upset. So 6 days after Hal Steinbrenner had that press conference, he came back to the podium and said, "The fans have spoken, we will bring back the Cracker Jack brand." And that was 12 years ago, and here we are today in 2016, Cracker Jacks are still being sold in the Bronx. If you want to know more about Cracker Jack, I wrote a lengthy article that's on my website for Candy and Snack magazine. So I did hint that there were a couple differences between the 1914 and 1915 version. In 1914, it was a smaller set. There was 144 cards. In 1915, it was a little bit larger, 176. Additionally, the print stock got a little bit thicker in 1915. Because what happened was, in 1914, the card stock was so thin, a lot of the cards ended up ripping. So in 1915, the print stock did get a little bit bigger. It doesn't matter though what year you have, these cards are frequently found with staining, caramel staining, on either the front and or the back. And it's probably hard to see here, but this Joe Jackson baseball Cracker Jack card that I have up here, there is some staining on his shoulder, kind of all over, to be honest. So when thinking about which set is more valuable, the 1914 or 1915 counterpart, the 1914 version is much more valuable for one reason and one reason only: the method of distribution. In 1914, the only way to get these cards was to actually go to the 5 and dime and spend your money, and inside each package of Cracker Jack would be one card. You could still do that in 1915, However, what you could also do in 1915 was put some money in the mail it away, and in return, Cracker Jack would send you the cards in the mail. So because in 1915 there are two methods of distribution, the 1914 is much, much, much more valuable. So we talked about Cracker Jacks, we talked about tobacco cards, we talked about cards in the 1800s. I thought it'd be important to talk about the 1933 Goudy set, because a lot of us remember getting that stick of gum with our cards in the 50s and 60s. Well, that idea actually originated right here in 1933 with Goudy Gum Company in Boston, Massachusetts. This set is littered with Hall of Famers. There's 240 cards in the set. There are 4 Babe Ruth cards, 2 Lou Gehrig cards. This set today is highly, highly, highly collectible. If you fast forward to the fall of 1933, kids everywhere got together and they were showing off their cards, and the whole purpose of collecting these cards was to actually complete an entire set, right? Well, it turns out nobody anywhere had card number 106, Nap Lajoie. And so the kids talked to their parents and they said, "Mom, Dad, where is this one card? We're missing this card. We've gone to the Five and Dime, where is it? Please help us find this card." And so the parents talked to other parents. Parents said, "Yeah, we also are looking for this card for little Johnny, interesting, okay." So nobody has this card. So the parents wrote in nasty letters to Goudy Gum Company inquiring, "Where is this card? Where is it? Nobody has it." Well, it turns out it was a sales and marketing ploy. They purposely omitted, they did not print card number 106 because they knew if they did that, the kids would go back and back to the Five and Dime store, spend more and more money in search of just that one card. So what was the end result here? What happened? Well, in the spring of 1934, Goudy actually did manufacture that baseball card, number 106. And they sent it back in the mail to every parent who wrote in a nasty letter. But today, because that card is very rare, it's worth a lot of money, but there's also a lot of fakes, and reprints, and forgeries out there. Anytime I go to a flea market or a garage sale, kind of like the Honus Wagner, the T206 Wagner, I see a lot of just bad fake cards. This card ranges in value anywhere from $1,000 on the low end to $40,000, $50,000 on the high end if it's perfectly mint, just for this one card, number 106, Nap Lajoie. So if you kind of fast forward to 1952 here, this was a very important year for a couple different reasons. One, it was Mickey Mantle's rookie year. Yes, I know he had a 1951 Bowman card in the set, but that's considered his first year card. His rookie card in this set is much, much, much more valuable. But Topps was really trying to figure out how they can gain market share and crush the competition, which at that time was Bowman Baseball Card Company. And Topps decided they were going to do two things. One, they were going to increase the total size of the card set. So they produced 407 single cards in this set. At that time, in '52, this was a very large set, 407 cards. Additionally, they thought that kids wanted larger sized cards. So they made the cards actually taller, top to bottom and left to right, bigger cards. And so that's what Topps did. Turns out that was the right move because Bowman only lasted another couple of years. 1955 was Bowman's last foray into the card market, and then they essentially kind of disappeared. Now, in the last couple of years, I'm starting to see some price appreciation associated with this set. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that a lot of baby boomers today that grew up in the 50s that collected, when they went off to college, their parents threw out all their cards. And now that they have, and now that all the kids have moved out of the house, they're retired maybe, they have extra income, they're using the set to buy back their childhood memories. So we are starting to see this set kind of steadily climb in the last couple of years, especially the Mickey Mantle card, okay? Now, this card up here, Larry Jensen, he's smiling. Who knows why Larry Jensen is smiling? Any thoughts? Well, he's smiling because he had, at the time that this card was, the time he was photographed, he had 7 kids. So he sold him 7 cards with 7 kids. That's right. He had 7 kids with, I think, 3 or 4 different women, but he had 7 kids nonetheless. And any time after the game, he was asked about his performance. Larry, great game today. Tell us more. He would never answer the question. He would always talk about his kids. That's all he ever wanted to talk about, his kids. When all was said and done, Larry had 10 total kids. And then finally, Cy Berger. So Cy Berger passed away about a year and a half ago, or so ago. He was the Topps president and co-creative director for decades. Well, in 1959, in Manhattan, there was warehouse upon warehouse of these baseball cards from 1952. And he had no idea why. Why do we have all these warehouses of all these baseball cards? Why can't we get rid of them? Well, his executive team was they were going to circuses, they were going to sideshows, they were trying to sell them. 100 for a penny, 1,000 for a penny. It didn't matter. Just give me a penny, I'll give you how many cards you want. Didn't matter. Nobody wanted these cards. Nobody. So Cy said, all right guys, I want you to go home tonight. He told his entire executive team, go home tonight. I want you to brainstorm and think of an idea on how we can get rid of these cards and get rid of these cards quickly. Everybody went home. They came back in the morning and Cy said, give it to me. What's the idea? How will we get rid of these cards? And his team said, I don't know. We've been thinking about this for the last 7 years. We just don't know. So Cy said, I have an idea. And this is exactly what he did. He loaded up a huge, great big barge with these cards, drove that barge out to the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and dumped the barge overboard. And that's how he got rid of the cards. So on that fateful day in the fall of 1959, tens upon tens of millions of dollars, if not more, of baseball cards were disposed of. So we talked about cards, but I also want to talk about memorabilia, because there's a lot of memorabilia out there, especially game-used memorabilia. Game-used memorabilia is highly collectible, highly prized by collectors today. In the 50s and 60s, each player was only given, baseball player, was only given 4 jerseys for the entire year. 2 home jerseys and 2 road jerseys, and that was it. It didn't matter if the jerseys got damaged or they got, ripped or cut, whatever it is, you still wore it. The guy in the locker room would sew it up, and you get right back out there. At the end of the season, the players were not allowed to keep those jerseys. They had to give the jerseys back to the baseball club. And what the baseball club did was, they would box up all the jerseys. They would first rip off the name and rip off the number, put them in a big box, and ship them down to their AA and AAA affiliates for use in the following season. Now, there were a couple that kind of slid out the back door. So anytime you see an authentic game-used jersey from the 50s and 60s, they will sell for $50, $100, $200,000 if it's Sandy Koufax, $500,000 for a game-used jersey from the 50s. Most of us are familiar with Curt Schilling. He was a pitcher for a long time, actually. And I think over the course of his career, he made about $60 million. But he was a great pitcher, but that was never his passion in life. His passion was video games. He loved to play video games. And so his goal, his dream, when he retired was he opened up a video game company. And the company quickly scaled. He hired about 400 people in about 18 months. Well, shortly thereafter, the company was insolvent and bankrupt. And he was forced to liquidate everything, including a lot of his, pretty much everything he owned, including that famous bloody sock from the playoff game in 2004. So when Curt Schilling started that game, his sock was white, as it should be. You go to Walmart, go to Target, it's a white sock, right? At the end of the game, that sock was red. He was bleeding profusely from his ankle. And somebody actually paid $100,000 for that bloody sock from 2004. I don't know who it was or what they're going to do with it, but it just goes to show you that people will buy pretty much anything game used. So I have a program up here, 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates. And a question that I get asked a lot is, Michael, I'm going to start collecting, where do I start, how do I start? Well, I always advise starting with some of the paper items. So ticket stubs and programs and scorecards, because they aren't that hard to find and they don't cost an arm and a leg. So start there. Additionally, with programs, especially the old ones, the advertising inside is extremely different. You'll see, like in this program here, you'll see advertising from a shoe shine company, even some old ads from McDonald's or GE. They are really, really, really interesting. So, about 6 months ago, I did a presentation, and a gentleman came up to me. It was him and his girlfriend. I was sitting at a table, and he was telling me about this great Dan Marino signed autograph. Kept on talking, but I didn't see anything. He had no bags with him, nothing. And so finally, after about 3 minutes, I said, "Show it to me. Let me see this great Dan Marino autograph." And in front of everybody, he takes off his shirt and turns around. He had a big tattoo of Dan Marino on his back. And he said, "Michael, how much is this worth?" And I said, I don't know what to say, I was speechless. He goes, "Well, you're a certified appraiser. You need to tell me how much this is worth." I said, "It's non-transferable. You can't sell this. It's worth nothing. To you, maybe it's worth $1 million. And his girlfriend popped up, and she said, "You can't tell us how much this is worth?" So that was a unique experience, so don't ever do that. Please. So behind me here are the things that most people get signed, okay? So let's kind of go through those. Balls. Could be a basketball, a baseball, a football. You always want to make sure it's on an official league ball. You don't want it on a green ball or a softball or a minor league ball or a ball made in Korea or China, right? Always, always an official league ball. Additionally, when getting something signed for investment purposes, you need to think about supply and demand, right? Because if I go to Las Vegas right now, where Pete Rose, he signs his life away 6 days a week, I can probably spend $95, $100 and shake his hand, exchange pleasantries, get an autograph of Pete Rose, $100. However, I could get that same authentic Pete Rose autographed baseball by going to eBay and paying about half of that, maybe $45 or $50. So, those are also some things to think about. Some people are happy spending the extra $50 to shake his hand, say hello, exchange memories of watching him play, all that good stuff. I put jerseys on here. These obviously are non-game use jerseys, but I see a lot of jerseys framed, hung up in man caves. They look extremely nice. However, framing is not cheap, as most of us probably do know. And then some of the paper items, so scorecards and programs. A lot of the guys in the 60s and 70s, the players were really, they enjoyed signing things for their fans. And they were pretty accessible, either before and or after the game. It's not like it is today. And so today I see a lot of these programs signed by some of the great athletes from yesteryear. And cards. This is actually kind of important because usually the person that's a true card collector and the person who's an autograph collector can be two different people. So the person that wants the autograph or collects autographs wants the autograph on a baseball or a baseball bat or a jersey, what have you. He or she may not necessarily want it on a card. There are some instances where the value of a signed card will actually increase, but most of the time, a signed baseball card actually decreases the value. Authentication. So authentication is a hot talking point. It has been for several years now, obviously. But it may be cost prohibitive. And I'll give you an example here. So let's say you have an item that's worth $50. and you send it in or have someone look at it, and maybe they charge you $100, and it comes back authentic and genuine, and you're excited, but maybe the value only went up $30. Maybe now it's worth $80. It used to be worth $50. So you want to make sure, if you are going to have something looked at, that financially it does make sense. Okay? A COA stands for a certificate of authenticity, and an LOA stands for a letter of authenticity. They basically mean the same exact thing. But just because you have one, it doesn't mean what you have is real. I'll say that again. Just because you have one, it doesn't mean what you have is real. I'll give you another example here. So I have a neighbor, Scott. Scott's a great guy. He does construction in Chicago. He's like, people always want him. He's on the hottest jobs, but all he has time for is construction. He doesn't watch sports. He doesn't know anything about players, Mickey Mantle or Babe Ruth, nothing. But let's say Scott signs off on 100 letters saying that this Mickey Mantle autograph is real. Well, it doesn't mean a damn, right? Because he doesn't even know who Mickey Mantle is. He's never seen the Mickey Mantle autograph. Unfortunately today, a lot of people are duped into buying something because it comes with a letter. You want to make sure the letter is signed by a person who is respected, accredited, who understands what they're looking at, okay? I see it every day. People send me stuff in the mail, they call me, they send me emails, text messages. A lot of bad stuff out there. So just because, again, you find something with a letter, it doesn't mean it's real. The way that a correct determination is made if something is real or not is an authenticator will have in their computer database maybe 400 or 500 known exemplars or examples of what they deem to be authentic and genuine. And what they'll do is they'll compare what you have. So if you bring in, let's say, a Ted Williams signature, signed baseball, they'll look in their database and look at slant flow and spacing between the letters, pen pressure, the height of the letters, all these different things to make an accurate reading if something is real or not. Okay? And then signatures do change over time. Mine has changed over time. Yours has changed over time. I remember one time I saw a gentleman, he had a bag of Mickey Mantle signed baseballs. And he kept a couple of them back because he had to leave pretty quickly. He had his daughter's softball game. And I asked him, I said, what else is in the bag? I see you have a couple balls in there. And he said, no, I have to go. I have to go to the softball game. I said, just let me see. He said, okay, fine, but do it quick. And I looked, and he had a very authentic and early Mickey Mantle signature. He was so familiar with Mickey Mantle's signature from the 1980s. Mickey Mantle, every single weekend, was out doing these autograph shows. And so, in fact, most people today are familiar with that signature because he signed a gajillion of them. But there aren't that many vintage Mickey Mantle signatures out there. So because he never seen one, he just automatically thought it was fake. So reprints and forgeries, there's a lot of bad stuff out there. And from a top 10 list perspective, I put some of them up here. So Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle, Babe Ruth. From a non-sports perspective, Marilyn Monroe, a lot of bad Marilyn Monroe stuff out there. Walt Disney as well. This baseball you see behind me on the sweet spot, it's black. It did say Joe DiMaggio. Several years ago, the FBI did a sting operation coast to coast. And they took down several families who actually were making a lot of money forging baseballs and then selling them as genuine and authentic. The FBI was unsure what to do with these 30 or 35,000 signed baseballs, and not one of them was real. Do we throw them out in the garbage, clog up the landfills? Well, there is a website, pitchinforbaseball.org, and what they do is they gather up supplies and ship them down to third world countries, Haiti, Dominican Republic, for little kids to use and play baseball with. So I thought that was a good idea, instead of just throwing out these balls in the landfills. So how does one determine if a baseball card is a reprint or not? Well, generally speaking, if you turn the card over, there's a couple things to look at there. One, it'll talk about the player in past tense. So Babe Ruth died on August 16th, 1948. Ty Cobb was inducted to the Hall of Fame on ABC date. Also, sometimes on the bottom left or right-hand corner of the card, on the back, it'll have the date, printed in 1984, something like that. So those are two pretty good, surefire ways to figure out if something is real or not. And then, of course, if something looks too good to be true, it's a possibility. Yes, there are mint cards from 80, 90, 100 years ago. That is definitely the case, but that doesn't happen very often. So I know that paper oxidizes at a certain rate over time, right? And so if I see something that looks too good to be true, I have to further inspect it. So always pay attention to that as well. And then, should you purchase reprints? Well, for years, I would try to purchase as many as I could and then shred them or burn them or try and get rid of them. But there are just too many of these cards out there for me. The one thing I will say, if you do if you do purchase them and you try and sell them at a later date, please don't try and pawn them off as authentic and genuine, because that's not good business. So this is my last slide here. So this is what I wrote for the Huffington Post a couple years ago. How does someone value at home what they have? Well, it's kind of like if you were to try and sell your house or a piece of property, the realtor will tell you it's about location, location, location. With cards, it's about condition, condition, condition. So what does that mean? Well, what does the centering look like? So I talked about it earlier. Cards came off the printing press 50, 60, 70 years ago, not perfectly centered. The technology was not up to speed. They were not able to do that. Well, if a card is severely off-centered, that impacts the value in a downward fashion immensely. Corners. You want to make sure you have 4 sharp corners. That's obviously important. That's in the case across all sports. We talked about staining, whether it's tobacco cards, Cracker Jack cards, and even some cards from the 1950s and 60s with bubblegum stains on the front or the back. Staining is important and also affects value as well. This here, my 10-cent ruler from Target, is my best investment I've ever, it's just incredible because, unfortunately, a lot of people trim baseball cards, or any card. And the reason why they do that is because, again, you want to have sharp corners. But I know if a card should measure 2 1/16 by 3 1/8 or 2 5/8 by 3 3/4, most of the time I can rub my finger around the edges and determine if a card has been trimmed. But if I'm unsure, I just quickly take a 2-second measure with that. And then paper loss. So in the late 1800s and early 1900s, unless you were really wealthy, you did not have a safety deposit box or a bank. The way that you stored your cards was you would glue them into an album or a scrapbook and then hide that scrapbook somewhere in the house that no one would ever know about. So in fact, actually, sometimes today you'll see a house being torn down and you'll find a scrapbook lodged in between the walls or underneath the floorboards. But when I see these beautiful scrapbooks, I know if I try and remove the cards from the scrapbook, the whole back is going to fall off because they're glued in there, right? So that does also impact value as well. And then lastly, anything after 1975. A couple things happened around 75. First thing, people started to realize, hey, you know what? All those cards we put in our bicycle spokes, those things now have money. And they started hoarding them. The other thing that happened was the technology for the printing press changed and changed immensely. Baseball card manufacturers were now able to mass produce baseball cards around the clock, 24/7. They finally had that capability from a technology perspective to do so. Up until then, they couldn't. So when you think about supply and demand, in the mid-70s, the supply jumps greatly, okay? So here is just a couple of things to think about when you're home, self-appraising what you have. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
What's the closest you've ever been to one of those Honus Wagner baseball cards?
So I actually have touched a couple of them, but I've never owned any of them. Yeah, so other people in the hobby, you know, got a nice look at it. It's just an amazing thing to look at from a historical perspective, but also from a monetary value as well.
I have a couple of autographed cards that came with a letter of certificate, and the letter is signed by Frank Robbins, but it's reproduced. Does that mean anything?
So I don't exactly know what you're talking about. However, if it does say it's been reproduced, there isn't going to be.
It doesn't say it. The letter itself is a reproduction. It's like they ran it off of
It's a
Xerox.
LOA that's
Yeah.
been multiple reproduced.
That's no good. Yeah, that's never good. In fact,
What was the first
a similar, someone actually asked me kind of a similar thing here. Someone said to me, Michael, I don't have a COA, but I got, it was Johnny Bench. It was a Johnny Bench signed baseball. And I have a picture showing that Johnny Bench signed this baseball for me. That should be good enough, right? Wrong.
No.
The reason being is because, similar thing,
He signed a baseball.
he signed a baseball, right?
Yeah.
That person could be holding on to that real baseball and then just signing 100 other baseballs and just showing, hey, look, I have the picture.
Yeah.
So, same thing. Other questions?
I've been wondering about it.
So you were talking about the faking of a Ted Williams autographed ball. If somebody had a ball that was genuinely sent by him, what would be the basic value of it?
Signed baseball, Ted Williams on a sweet spot, anywhere from $300 to $500, maybe $600, depending on condition.
Okay.
Are there certain items you can evaluate based on a picture?
Is this an autograph or?
No, just it's a like a trivet, a pin of some sort.
So, the answer is, I don't know, but if you come up to me afterwards, I'm happy to take a look and kind of see what you have.
Maybe I missed something, but if trimming the card devalued the card, why did the guy go to jail for trimming the card?
Yeah, so the guy that went to jail, yes, he did trim the card. He did some other things as well. He did plead guilty to trimming the card at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse last year. It was a series of different things. It just wasn't one thing. Yeah, but I think that trimming the card was the highlight that people kind of keyed in on, because that's like the holy grail of the hobby, is the Honus Wagner cards.
So when you said that the owner of the Arizona team bought that card and then found out later it was trimmed, what's the value of that card now? Or is it?
Yeah, so the question was, I don't know if you guys heard in the back, the question was, so that card that now is known to be trimmed, how much is that card worth? Well, we can guess. We will probably never know, because Ken Kendrick, who purchased it, he has said, that card will never be sold. I will pass it down to my kids. Those kids will pass it down to their kids. It will never again it will be in the open market. But it has gotten a lot of publicity. Whether it's good or bad, it has gotten a lot of publicity. One thing I will say, and I said that the Honus Wagner card, not that particular one, but across all conditions, is very, very valuable. Here we are, April 16th of 2016. For the past 30, 40, 50 years, every time that Honus Wagner, doesn't matter in what condition, has changed hands, the person has always made money. The seller has always made money selling it a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. They have never, ever, ever, one time ever, lost money. So, I don't know if that answers your question, and we just may never know.
Thank you.
Way in the back.
So why is the Honus Wagner so rare, and why is it such an important card?
Sure. So there's a couple reasons. Well, first and foremost, he was, Hall of Famer for the Pirates, played his entire career for the Pirates, and again, a Hall of Famer. But according to legend, according to lore, Honus did not like smoking or cigarettes. And when he found out that his likeness, his image, was being printed and inserted into packages of tobacco products, he was extremely upset. He wasn't even getting paid. So he called up the American Tobacco Company and said, you will, starting right now, rip my card from your sheets. You will no longer print my card. You understand me? He was very firm, and they said yes. But at that point, some of the cards did actually sneak out into the public. But when he made that call, the American Tobacco Company said, okay, we understand where you sit on this. You will stop making the card. So that's why it's so valuable. All right, anybody else? All right, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out and listening to me today. I promised Gary and I promised Ellie I would not read from a book, and I think I've done that. One thing I will do is I did promise Ellie and Gary that I will stick around, answer any questions, show me pictures, show me whatever you have. So I'm here for the rest of the night. I'm sitting at this table here with my mom. I'll be walking around. So feel free to come up and introduce yourself. I'll also have some business cards. I don't know where I put them, but I'll probably put some cards on this table here up front. Here's my information on the screen, okay? Thanks again, everybody.
Yes, I think he did it. I think he met my standard, and I hope you guys agree. He knows his stuff, and I'm the guy with the 1950 plus Topps cards at home with all those bad edges. That's all I need to tell you. So I keep listening. I'm going, well, maybe I'll show him to Michael just for the heck of it. And he'll find that one, little piece of gold in the middle of all those worn out cards that are sitting in a roll top desk at home. I wanted to before we adjourn for the night, assure you that we will collect your money for the silent auction. I'm just struggling to get internet connection on my phone. I found my little square scanner things for the credit card people. Everybody knows Scooter, so yeah, that's in our case we tease him about Scooter being Scooter. And so please check in with him.
Scooter. Without Scooter, this thing would not have happened.
Thank you, Scooter.
Scooter's our money guy. That's all I need to say. There were a few items that didn't appear, but we have a member of our team. It was, and I already think I talked to Bill Rose about it. We had a set, the CD set of the PBS show. It was Doc from our club. He also had a book that he wrote that was in the offering, and the book that matched up with the PBS set. So we'll get that to you guys. Just name and address and let me know. To me, it's not about, oh well, we didn't have it and we're not going to charge you extra for anything. That's not the way I operate. So please think about buying some of my t-shirts just so that I can make my nut just to break even. I already got it in my head that if I got X'd over out of those 95, that my team, their siblings, whoever needs a t-shirt, I'm just giving them to them. It's not important to me to make the money beyond that. So for me, it's kind of a collector's item. It tells you you've been here. I'm hearing good things about the Methodist campground. I think it was truly a vintage experience for you, and that's what we were looking for. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. Breakfast tomorrow at 7, but it goes till 9 so that the executive committee can do our little board meeting behind closed doors, deal with the election. And then we have the general meeting at 9 o'clock. And Pops tells me he doesn't have an agenda planned, and everybody that's on the executive board finds this to be a special moment in our lives. So it says on the thing that we're done at 11:30, but unless one of us rambles on me, there's a good chance that we'll be done before 11:30. Of course, I'll have to make arrangements if anybody does the hotel bus, but other than that, yes, freight train question, was that the question? I'm a mind reader, I'm a teacher, I'm supposed to do that, figure it out before they get it out.